Now let's get into question. Jen is ready. Jen, what's the question that we've got?
All right, so we got two. We're going to start with, do you see a growing demand for podcasting and video content creation tools among educators and students?
Well, let me put it this way. So I ran a podcast for 3 or 4 years. We had about 250 episodes. I studied the space. I've been to all the conferences. I've given talks about it. So I do care about podcasting and have a general sense of things. I do think that sometimes these markets are overinflated, if it makes sense, because I can tell you for the 3 years I was going to podcast conferences, people were saying ad revenue from podcasts is going to double, triple in the next 3 or 4 years, all this stuff that honestly did not come true. And actually, the podcasting market, in my mind, plateaued a little bit. Now, does that mean there's not a growing demand from educators and students for these tools? No. Can I tell you exactly what that growing demand is in aggregate? No. What you should do, though, to discover if there is a growing demand is, again, go out into the market. One thing, though, that I'll clarify is, yes, for investors and everything, we need to communicate big markets. But to actually build your product or your service 0 to 1, you don't have to go into a massive market. You don't have to even go after a market that is taking off, and doubling or tripling every year. You should probably be going after a growing market. It helps create some tailwinds in what you're building. But your job in the beginning is just to find your sort of 1,000 true fans, so to speak. In other words, out of the billions of people out there or the hundreds of millions that might be in your market, what are the thousands that actually will demand your product? And that most likely will happen within a particular niche. So I wouldn't really overthink whether or not you should pursue something based on some trends that may or may not be accurate.
Let me ask about education in particular, because I'm interested. I've got a venture in education, but by no means am I an expert. You've lived in that world. Do you think that if you are a professor at Harvard, you should have a podcast?
Probably not.
Why not?
But because it depends on what kind of professor. If you are a pure academic, it's less interesting. And a lot of professors are tenured. They haven't been in the field for a long time. If you're also a practitioner, then probably you have something to say that'll be interesting to the market. The other thing with podcasting, though, to remember is only some humans out there, and Ed, you're obviously an example of that, and so are our founders who have a podcast. Only some people out there are charismatic enough to be a host of a podcast, if that makes sense, right? And it's okay if you're not. And so I think the job of the person that asked that question is to go out there and talk to 10, 20 professors and think for themselves how many of them should actually be putting content out there because they're also personality. And what you'll probably find is it's going to be about 2 out of 20, right? But that doesn't matter though, because let's say there's, again, I'm throwing these numbers out there, but let's say there's 50,000 or 100,000 professors out there. Well, if your market is a few thousand, that could be enough, right? But I wouldn't say every single professor out there needs to have a podcast. It depends.
Also, the incentive systems, like when you're tenured, you are not really incentivized to go public and bring people out. It's more of like a gated, someone pays and gets out there, unless you're trying to build a brand for yourself, which lends me to the next question. What do you think? You're looking at education, you're looking at Harvard professors. What do you think is the intersection between podcasts and education? What's the future? What are you looking at?
I think that people consume the content that they want to consume. So if you believe that you can create really high quality content with a unique perspective and insight, you will have followers, you will grow an audience, you will be successful with your podcast. Now, if we're talking about some kind of specialized podcasts that are used as an educational tool, which is maybe what this founder is thinking about, that can supplement the curriculum of the course. Now that starts to get interesting because I personally am all about practical learning. And so I believe that our education can use more of that, especially higher education can use more of practical learning where you're learning about the real-time reality of the market, which unfortunately a lot of tenured professors aren't able to provide. They haven't been in the game for usually many, many different years. And as you're saying, Ed, oftentimes the incentives aren't aligned. But also, these professors might not want to be creators. It's the same question I would ask somebody that's saying, hey, should I build my own personal brand online? Well, yes, personal brands are the thing. And yes, if you can create and build an audience, you probably will be all set and will be able to get customers at any time with any new product that you build. But do you want to do that? Not everybody needs to have their own audience. There's all sorts of implications that come with that. And again, I think it's a subset of the population that'll be successful with that. I think podcasts will play an increasingly bigger role, but again, it's not for everybody.
I think you're right. You hit the nail on the head. Do you want to be a creator? So that's where I would say if there's an intersection between educator and creator, because I've learned a lot of stuff on YouTube and podcasts that I didn't learn in school, and I wouldn't sit in a boring ass lecture. I think that there's a future for delivering things via a podcast sort of thing. not maybe the Netflix. I know some startups have gone on, they tried to create the Netflix of education. You see masterclass out there. I don't know. I'm waiting to see. But here's an interesting comment that came through from Doug again. I do think that there is a place for students to learn how to do video and students to present instead of writing an essay, do a video. Because here's the thing, and let me go back here, and this is where we're going to get philosophical, but I'd love to hear, Vadim, your thoughts and what the audience thinks. There was a time where I had an educator, he challenged me, and he said, I want you to read this book on like the path of education or where the education system came from. There was something that I think it was called the Trivium or something like that. The original education was a liberal arts. So back in the medieval days, you would have to go to school and you would have to learn rhetoric, vocabulary, and like critical thinking or debate or something like that. So you learned how to talk, how to present, and then you got into the technical stuff. And the argument was, these days we're just going right into technical. And we're not learning how to present, not learning how to be charismatic, be a creator, use media. And there was this country, I believe it was Norway, somewhere in that region. They saw their community, the population, start to decline. And they said, we need to invest in the future. So they created these little mini schools where anybody could go. You had to be chosen and you couldn't pay to get in there. It was government funded. And they taught you how to debate, how to do a video presentation, all those things. And these individuals became the leaders after they learned the technical stuff. So I think that there's definitely a role if you're looking at ed tech, for people who want to get into ed tech. I think that creating tools for students to go out and give presentations and getting teachers to go, yeah, I want to take a video presentation rather than sit and read an essay. I think that's an interesting prospect. What do you think, Vadim?
I definitely think so. And I'll add something here, though, kind of going back to what we talked about, which is I'll touch on a couple of things, but which is, do you want to be a creator? There's a lot of entrepreneurs that I talk to here at Startups.com inclusive, where at some point I'll hear something like, this is innovative, I need to educate the market. Or maybe in this case, hey, everybody should be podcasting, I need to educate you on the benefit of being a creator. Those are inherently very, very difficult businesses to build and get off the ground, because not only do you have to convince someone that they have the problem, you then have to make them want to use your product. It's easier to sell to someone, to convince someone of the value of what you're building, if they already feel the problem, or in this case, if they already want to be a creator. Now, here's where I'll kind of play devil's advocate with myself based on what you just said, Ed, because I agree with 100%. A lot of people suck at communicating, increasingly more, because we have TikTok, because we no longer have to write things by hand, right? Because now we have ChatGPT that can do things for us. People are becoming worse and worse communicators. And I believe that skill, whether it's public speaking, whether it's speaking in a one-on-one conversation or in a meeting and knowing how to manage a meeting, or even writing an email, quite frankly, I think those skills are actually going to be differentiators in the future for somebody to stand out, to build relationships, and to actually be successful in a career. So I would say because a lot the newest generations are born with technology, I would say that message could resonate, because yes, if there's a tool that can make them a better communicator, then they should absolutely be using that tool. But if you're building a business around that, it's going to be easier to sell to someone that actually already recognizes the fact that they need to become a good communicator to be competitive in the workforce, or to be competitive as an entrepreneur in the future.
And that need is going to grow more and more. Yeah, it's an interesting discussion for sure. I wasn't expecting to go down that path.